There are moments when light seems to arrive without intention, not as something dramatic, not as something that asks to be noticed. It simply appears. The sunlight settles softly across the water. The waves continue their movement toward the shore. The sand remains where it has always been. The rocks rise quietly from the sea without asking for attention. Everything exists exactly as it is, and yet something feels different. Perhaps it is not the light itself. Perhaps it is the absence of urgency. The moment does not seem to be moving toward anything. The waves arrive. The waves retreat. The light remains. Nothing appears incomplete. At first, the mind may still search for something more. A reason for the calm. A meaning hidden somewhere beneath the surface. A destination waiting beyond the horizon. But the moment offers none of these things. It simply continues. The water moves around the rocks without resistance. The shore receives each wave without preference. Nothing argues with what is happening. Nothing asks for another version of the moment. Everything remains exactly where it belongs. The sunlight resting across the stone feels effortless. The ocean does not reach toward it. The rock does not hold on to it. The light arrives and remains for as long as it remains. Then eventually it changes, not because something made it happen, because everything changes naturally. The mind often moves differently. It wants certainty. It wants direction. It wants to know where things are going. But standing beside a shoreline like this, those questions begin to lose their urgency. The sea has no destination. The waves do not wonder whether they are moving correctly. The light does not question where it should fall. Everything simply continues. Thought appears briefly, a memory, a plan, a concern waiting quietly somewhere beneath awareness. For a moment it may seem important. The mind begins to move toward it, begins to follow it, but something softer happens instead. The thought remains only briefly, without resistance, without attachment. It fades. The waves continue. The sunlight remains. The rock stands motionless against the water. Nothing changes, and yet everything continues. This creates a strange kind of ease, not because problems disappear, not because answers suddenly arrive, but because the moment stops demanding explanation. There is nothing here to solve, nothing here to understand. The sea is not trying to teach anything. The sunlight is not offering a lesson. The shoreline is not asking to become meaningful. It simply exists. And perhaps that is enough. The mind slowly becomes quieter, not silent, just less busy. The constant movement of thought begins to soften. The need to measure, the need to compare, the need to decide what comes next. All of it becomes less important. The moment remains. The waves continue arriving, one after another, each different, each familiar. None of them staying, none of them needing to stay. The water touches the shore, then disappears, then returns. Nothing is lost, nothing is gained. Everything continues naturally. The sunlight shifts almost invisibly. The shadows around the rocks change. The colors within the water deepen and soften. But the changes happen without effort, without announcement, without urgency. The mind notices this and slowly begins to mirror it. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer arrive with the same weight. A memory surfaces, then fades. A question appears, then disappears. Nothing demands an answer. Nothing insists on remaining. The space between thoughts becomes larger, more open, less crowded. The moment begins to feel wider, not because the world has changed, because attention has stopped narrowing itself around every passing thought. The sea continues. The shore remains. The sunlight rests quietly across the stone. Everything exists together. Nothing competes for importance. The waves do not try to become larger. The rocks do not try to become stronger. The light does not try to become brighter. Everything simply remains itself. There is something deeply peaceful about this. Not exciting, not dramatic, just peaceful. The kind of peace that appears when nothing is being forced. The kind of peace that exists beneath constant effort. The kind of peace that has been present all along. The mind often overlooks it, searching instead for something greater, something more meaningful, something more complete. But standing within a moment like this, those searches begin to lose their direction. The moment is already complete, not because it contains everything, because it asks for nothing. The waves continue arriving. The sunlight continues resting across the water. The rock remains steady against the movement surrounding it. Everything continues together. Nothing stands apart. Nothing asks to become more. After a while, even the movement of the waves begins to feel different. At first, the water seemed to be arriving somewhere. Each wave moved toward the shore, touched the sand, and then disappeared back into the sea. There appeared to be a direction, a beginning, an ending. But gradually that feeling begins to soften. The waves no longer seem to be going anywhere. They simply continue. The water rises, the water falls, the shoreline remains. Nothing is accomplished. Nothing is left unfinished. Everything exists within the same quiet rhythm. The sunlight still rests upon the rocks. Its brightness has changed slightly, though it is difficult to say when. The light never announced its arrival. It never announced its movement. It simply shifted naturally, becoming something new without effort. The sea does the same. The waves continue without asking permission, without hesitation, without concern for whether they are moving correctly. The mind notices this, and for a moment it becomes curious, not curious in the usual way, not searching for answers, not trying to understand, simply noticing. The ocean does not carry the burden of becoming something else. It is not trying to improve itself. It is not trying to arrive at a future version of what it should be. It simply remains what it is, wave after wave, moment after moment. The rock rising from the water seems to share this same quality. It stands where it stands. The sea moves around it. The sunlight settles upon it. The passing hours change its appearance. Yet it does not resist any of it. It does not cling to the morning. It does not hold on to the light. It does not prepare for the evening. It simply remains. There is something strangely comforting about this, not because stillness is better than movement, not because permanence is better than change, but because neither one appears to be fighting the other. Everything belongs. The water belongs. The rock belongs. The light belongs. Even the changing nature of the moment belongs. Nothing feels misplaced. The mind often creates separation. It labels one experience good and another bad, one moment desirable and another unwanted, one feeling acceptable and another difficult. But standing quietly beside the sea, those distinctions begin to lose some of their certainty. The wave that arrives is no better than the wave that leaves. The sunlight is no more important than the shadow. The movement is no more meaningful than the stillness. Everything participates equally in the moment. Thought appears again. A small concern, a memory, a fragment of something waiting somewhere beyond this shoreline. For a moment, attention begins moving toward it. The familiar habit returns, the urge to follow, the urge to continue, the urge to build the thought into something larger. But before it fully forms, something changes. The sound of the water remains, the light remains, the warmth of the sand remains, and the thought begins to fade naturally. Not because it is pushed away, not because it is unwanted, simply because it is no longer needed. The moment requires nothing from it. Breathing continues quietly. The body remains relaxed. The shoulders soften. The jaw loosens. The constant effort of holding everything together becomes less noticeable. Perhaps it was never necessary. Perhaps much of that effort was simply habit. The sea does not carry unnecessary effort. The sunlight does not carry unnecessary effort. The waves do not carry unnecessary effort. Everything moves according to its nature. Everything continues without force. The mind begins to recognize this, and slowly, very slowly, it becomes willing to do the same. Not completely, not all at once, just enough. Enough to stop holding every thought so tightly, enough to stop demanding certainty from every moment, enough to allow things to be unfinished. The water continues arriving at the shore, again and again and again, each wave unique, each wave familiar. None of them remaining, the rock remains steady amidst the movement, not resisting, not controlling, simply present. The sunlight continues to shift across its surface. The golden warmth softens. The shadows lengthen. The colors change. Yet nothing feels lost. Nothing feels gained. Everything simply continues. This realization arrives quietly, so quietly that it is almost missed. The moment does not need improvement, not because it is perfect, because it is already complete. Even its imperfections belong here. The uneven shoreline, the shifting water, the changing light, the passing thoughts, the wandering attention. Everything belongs. Nothing needs to be removed before peace can exist. Nothing needs to be added before stillness can appear. The waves continue. The sea breathes. The sunlight settles gently across the horizon. The mind becomes quieter, not empty, not silent. Gradually, even the feeling of calm begins to lose its definition. At first, there was a clear sense of stillness. The waves moved softly toward the shore. The sunlight rested quietly across the rocks. The ocean stretched outward beyond sight, carrying nothing except its own steady rhythm. The moment felt peaceful, but over time, even the recognition of peace begins to soften. Stillness no longer feels separate from movement. The waves continue arriving. The water continues retreating. Yet nothing seems disturbed. The movement belongs to the stillness. The stillness belongs to the movement. Neither one stands apart from the other. Everything continues together. The rock remains steady beneath the light. The sunlight continues shifting almost invisibly across its surface. The shadows deepen. The colors soften. Yet the changes no longer feel important enough to follow closely. They happen naturally, without effort, without announcement. The mind notices this, and something within it begins to slow. Not because concentration has increased, not because attention is being controlled, because there is simply less reason to rush. Nothing here is trying to become something else. The sea is not trying to arrive at a destination. The sunlight is not trying to remain where it is. The rocks are not trying to preserve themselves against time. Everything participates in change without resisting it. Everything remains exactly what it is. Thought appears again. A memory surfaces quietly. A conversation, a place, a version of the future that has not yet arrived. For a moment, the mind begins moving toward it. The familiar habit returns. The urge to continue the story, the urge to follow the thread, the urge to build something from the thought. But something softer happens. The sound of the waves remains present. The warmth of the light remains present. The steady rhythm of the ocean remains present. And the thought begins to lose its weight. Not because it is pushed away, not because it is wrong, simply because it no longer feels necessary. It fades naturally. The moment remains. Breathing continues quietly. The body remains at ease. The muscles that often carry unnoticed tension begin to soften. The effort of holding attention in place becomes unnecessary. Nothing requires such effort here. The sea is not forcing itself to move. The sunlight is not forcing itself to shine. The shoreline is not forcing itself to remain. Everything continues according to its nature. The mind begins to recognize this, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, it follows. There is less resistance now, less need to control, less need to decide what should happen next. The moment no longer feels like something waiting to become complete. It already is. The waves continue arriving at the shore. Again, and again, and again. Each wave disappearing almost as soon as it arrives. Yet nothing feels lost. Nothing feels unfinished. The water leaves. The water returns. The rhythm remains unchanged. The sunlight continues resting across the sea. The golden reflections shift across the surface. The colors deepen within the moving water. The horizon remains distant, yet distance itself begins to feel less important. The mind often imagines peace existing somewhere else, somewhere beyond the current moment, beyond the current circumstances, beyond the current version of life. But the ocean offers no such suggestion. The sea is not waiting. The shore is not waiting. The light is not waiting. Everything already exists where it is. Nothing appears concerned with becoming more complete. Attention widens. The space surrounding each thought becomes larger. The silence between mental activity becomes easier to notice. Thought still arrives, but it arrives more gently. A question, a memory, a passing image. None of it demands immediate attention. None of it insists on remaining. Everything moves naturally, the same way the waves move, the same way the light changes, the same way the tide continues without effort. The moment begins to feel wider, not physically wider, simply less crowded. There is more room for things to exist without explanation, more room for uncertainty, more room for incompleteness, more room for silence. The sea continues. The rocks remain. The sunlight softens further as the day slowly changes. Everything continues together. Nothing stands apart. Nothing asks to become the center. Nothing asks to be understood. This simplicity carries its own kind of peace. Not a dramatic peace, not an extraordinary peace, a quiet one, the kind that appears when nothing is being forced, the kind that exists beneath constant effort, the kind that has always been present, waiting beneath the noise of endless thinking. The mind becomes quieter still, not empty, not silent, just quieter. The questions become more distant. Eventually, even the feeling that the moment is continuing begins to fade. At first, there was still a sense of time passing. The waves arrived and disappeared. The sunlight slowly shifted across the rocks. The shadows lengthened almost invisibly as the day continued toward evening. The changes were subtle, but they could still be noticed. Over time, however, even this awareness softens. The moment no longer feels like something moving from one point to another. It no longer feels like a process. It simply remains. The waves continue. The sunlight remains. The rocks stand quietly within the movement surrounding them. Everything exists together without needing to become something else. The sea no longer appears to be traveling anywhere. The water rises. The water falls. The shore receives each wave without preference. Nothing arrives. Nothing leaves. Everything participates in the same continuous rhythm. The mind notices this, and something within it becomes still. Not because thought disappears. Thought continues to appear. A memory, a concern, a possibility, a quiet image from another time. For a moment, attention moves toward it. The familiar habit remains, the tendency to follow, the tendency to build, the tendency to create a story from whatever appears. But now the movement is softer, less automatic. The thought arrives. It remains briefly, then fades. Nothing needs to happen to it. Nothing needs to be resolved. The moment remains exactly as it was before the thought appeared. The ocean continues. The sunlight continues. The rhythm of the waves continues. Everything remains untouched. Breathing moves naturally. There is no effort within it, no instruction, no control. The body seems to understand something the mind often forgets: how to participate in the moment without trying to manage it. The sea understands this too. The shoreline understands it. The light understands it. Everything here exists without forcing itself, without defending itself, without needing justification. The mind slowly becomes willing to do the same. There is less urgency now, less pressure, less need to decide whether the moment is good enough. The waves do not ask whether they are meaningful. The rocks do not ask whether they are important. The sunlight does not ask whether it has accomplished enough. Everything simply exists, and perhaps existence itself is enough. Attention widens further. The boundaries between things seem softer. The sea, the shore, the sky, the light, the sound of the water. None of them feel entirely separate. Everything belongs to the same quiet space. Everything participates in the same silence. Not a silence without sound. A silence without resistance. The waves continue breaking against the shore. The water continues moving around the rocks. The wind moves softly across the surface of the sea. Yet beneath all of it, something remains completely undisturbed. Something that does not depend on conditions. Something that does not arrive or leave. The mind notices it only briefly, not because it is hidden, because it is so simple, so ordinary, so present that it is easily overlooked. Thought appears again, a memory from earlier, a question about tomorrow, a small concern waiting somewhere beyond this shoreline. But the thought no longer carries the same weight. It arrives, it remains, it leaves. Nothing changes. The sea continues. The sunlight remains. The rhythm persists. The moment asks for nothing. There is no lesson here, no destination, no achievement. Only the quiet continuation of things as they are. The waves rise and fall. The tide moves in its own time. The light shifts slowly across the water. Everything changes, yet nothing seems disturbed by change. Nothing appears threatened by it. Nothing tries to stop it. The mind begins to trust this, not intellectually, not as an idea, as an experience, a direct recognition that life continues whether it is controlled or not, that moments arrive whether they are planned or not, that peace appears most easily when it is no longer being chased. The horizon stretches quietly in the distance. The sea extends beyond sight. The sunlight softens further. The colors become warmer. The day continues moving toward evening. Yet none of this feels urgent. None of it feels like something is ending. The moment remains complete, exactly as it is. Attention settles naturally. No effort is required, no technique, no concentration, only presence, only the simple experience of being here. The waves continue arriving, again and again and again. None of them identical, none of them permanent, yet all of them belonging perfectly. The same is true for thoughts, the same is true for feelings, the same is true for moments. They arrive, they remain briefly, they disappear. Nothing is lost, nothing needs to be held.